Hey friends, tonight we are going to talk about something very simple, something you're about to do yourself. Sleep, but not the way you know it today. With blackout curtains, phone chargers, memory foam, and sleep apps. No, tonight we are traveling back hundreds of years, to the medieval world, to find out how people really slept. And let me tell you, it was stranger, noisier, and a lot itchier than you might imagine. So before you get comfortable, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's step slowly into the night of the Middle Ages. This isn't going to be exciting history. It's going to be calm, detailed, and just a little strange, the kind of history that helps you drift away. Segmented sleep, 2 sleeps, 1 night. In the modern world, most of us are told that 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep is the gold standard. But in the Middle Ages, things worked very differently. People didn't think of sleep as one long stretch. Instead, they practiced what we call segmented sleep. Here's how it worked. After sundown, people went to bed early. They called this first sleep. After about 4 hours, they would wake up. Deliberately, not in panic, not with insomnia, but because this was simply the routine. The waking period between first and second sleep lasted for 1 or 2 hours. People prayed, read religious texts, tended the fire, or checked on their animals. Some used the time for quiet conversations. Others, as medieval doctors noted, thought this was the best time for intimacy, since the body was rested and the mind was calm. Then came second sleep, which lasted until sunrise. Everyone from peasants to monks followed this rhythm, and even medieval writers like Chaucer casually mentioned it. Modern science suggests this 2-part sleep might actually be closer to our natural cycle, before electricity forced us into 8 continuous hours. So the next time you wake up at 2 a.m., don't worry. Just smile and whisper to yourself, yes, the watch has begun. Beds, from straw to feathers. Now let's talk about beds, or at least what passed for beds in medieval Europe. Forget high thread counts and memory foam. For most people, a bed was just a pile of straw. The poorest peasants slept on a straw mattress called a pallet. Sometimes the straw was stuffed into a sack, but often it was just spread on the floor. If you were unlucky, it might be damp, and if you were really unlucky, it might already be claimed by a cat. The straw offered some insulation, but it also hosted fleas, lice, and the occasional mouse. If it itched, you ignored it. If something bit you, you rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. If a family could afford a little more, they might raise the straw pallet onto a wooden frame. That didn't change the comfort much, but at least it reduced the number of beetles crawling into your ears. As for clothing, pajamas didn't exist. Most people simply slept in the clothes they wore during the day. Privacy was rare. Entire families, parents, children, maybe even grandparents, all slept together, sometimes on the same pile of straw. The wealthy, of course, had real beds. Nobles slept on wooden frames with feather mattresses, fine sheets, and embroidered covers. They even had canopies to keep out drafts and insects. A noble bed was so valuable it was often written into wills, passed down like treasure. Still, for most medieval folks, a bed was not about comfort. It was about survival, a place to keep warm, to avoid the cold floor, and to dream of being rich enough to sleep, without the sound of chickens rustling nearby. The nightcap, a hat for sleeping. When we say nightcap today, most people think of a drink before bed. But in the Middle Ages, a nightcap was literally a cap, a hat worn to bed. Why? Because medieval houses were cold. Drafty walls, leaky roofs, and windows made from parchment or thin slices of horn did very little to keep heat in. And since body heat escapes quickly through the head, a hat was essential. Nightcaps came in different shapes, but the most famous was long and pointed, like something a wizard might wear. Usually made of wool or linen, they were practical, if a little silly looking. For women, the nightcap sometimes doubled as a head covering to preserve modesty, even while asleep. In some regions, married women were expected never to show their hair, not even in bed. The nightcap also carried social meaning. In some towns, if someone answered the door wearing one, it was a polite way of saying, "I'm off duty. Please go away." Paired with long nightshirts, basically oversized tunics, medieval. Sleepwear was practical, warm, and occasionally flammable. Not stylish, but effective. Inns and shared beds. Now, let's imagine you were traveling in medieval Europe. You reached an inn at night, hoping for a bed. What you got was, well, not exactly a private room. Beds were shared. With strangers. Lots of strangers. Privacy wasn't expected. If there was space, you squeezed in. Sometimes 2 people, sometimes 3, sometimes more. In big cities, inns were more like dormitories, with rows of beds and no personal space. Travelers slept with their purses tied to their belts, or on top of their bags, so they wouldn't get robbed in the night. It sounds awful to us, but compared to sleeping outside in the cold, with wolves and bandits, it was an upgrade. The wealthy didn't deal with this. They traveled with servants, or demanded private rooms. But for ordinary people, a bed full of strangers was just another night. Prayer before bed. In the medieval world, going to sleep wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. People ended the day with bedtime prayers, not to relax, but to prepare for death. Yes, death. Because in those days, life was short, illness was common, and you could die in your sleep without warning. So people prayed every night, asking God to protect their souls if they didn't wake up. Children were taught prayers like, "If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." Sweet words, but really just a reminder that every bedtime might be your last. Monks and nuns had entire services before bed called Compline, where they prayed and then kept silence. Families prayed together, too, believing it kept demons, spirits, and nightmares away. For medieval people, sleep wasn't just rest. It was a rehearsal for death. Dreams. Messages from beyond. Dreams were taken very seriously in the Middle Ages. Today, we shrug them off as random nonsense, but back then, dreams were believed to be messages from God, saints, or sometimes demons. A dream of fire might mean hell. A dream of water could mean purification, or drowning. If you dreamed of something bizarre, like a goat-headed man juggling fish, you were advised to call a priest immediately. Monks and theologians even wrote entire books interpreting dreams. They believed your soul was active while you slept, and your dreams revealed hidden sins or warnings. In medieval literature, dreams were common plot devices. Knights met angels or demons in dreams, receiving guidance or temptations. Dreams were not entertainment. They were spiritual signals. Sleeping with animals. For peasants, warmth at night was always a problem. One solution was simple: sleep with animals. Cows, pigs, chickens, dogs, all shared the same space, sometimes the same bed. Not out of affection, but for survival. Animals generated heat, and in the freezing winters of Europe, that heat could mean the difference between life and death. Dogs curled at the feet. Chickens roosted nearby. Sometimes, a pig or cow raised the temperature of a room by a few precious degrees. It was messy, noisy, and unhygienic, but it worked. Wealthier families didn't usually sleep beside livestock. Those small lapdogs were popular bed companions, not for warmth, but for fashion. Monks and midnight prayers. Life in a monastery meant even stricter routines. Monks didn't sleep in soft beds. They often slept on wooden planks or straw, fully dressed, in large dormitories with dozens of others. At midnight, they woke for prayer services called matins. The bell rang, they shuffled into the chapel by candlelight, and prayed in the cold, sometimes for hours. Falling asleep mid-prayer was a real problem, and punishments were common. After matins, they returned to bed for their second sleep or moved straight into study and work. Comfort was not the goal. Discipline and devotion were. Sleeping upright. Here's something strange. Some medieval people chose to sleep sitting up. Why? 2 reasons. First, doctors at the time believed lying flat was bad for digestion and could cause dangerous congestion of the brain. Second, lying flat was associated with death. People feared God might mistake them for a corpse and collect them early. So, nobles sometimes slept propped up by pillows, like a medieval recliner. Monks sometimes slept upright on benches, just to make sure they weren't too comfortable. The real monsters: fleas, lice, and bed bugs. Finally, let's talk about the real monsters of the medieval night: pests. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs were everywhere. Hygiene was poor, bedding was rarely washed, and mattresses of straw made the perfect home for insects. Even nobles with feather beds weren't safe. In fact, some had servants whose job was literally to pick lice from their master's hair. People tried burning herbs, sleeping with garlic, or rubbing ashes in their sheets. None of it worked well. Fleas and lice were simply part of life. Conclusion: a different kind of sleep. So, what do we learn from all this? That medieval sleep was nothing like ours. It was segmented, communal, itchy, drafty, and often shared with both family and animals. Beds were treasures. Nightcaps were serious fashion. Dreams were spiritual warnings. And pests were simply part of the nightly routine. The medieval night was full of prayers, fears, whispers, and snores. It wasn't peaceful by our standards, but it was life. So the next time you wake up in the night, or fluff your pillow, or grumble about a noisy neighbor, remember your ancestors. Remember the peasants who shared their bed with goats, the monks who prayed at midnight, and the nobles who slept upright in feather beds while still scratching at lice. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find it easier to close your eyes, relax, and drift into dreams. Good night, friends. Sleep well.